So today we're going to be taking a look at using the pen tool and getting more comfortable with drawing outlines in Adobe Illustrator. I've prepared a sketch of flamingos that we're going to use, and we're going to look to open that up with a standard document. I can go up to File, New, and we're going to just go with the standard print document, letter size, and we can change the units to inches if you prefer. For more vibrancy in the color, I'm going to switch my CMYK to RGB. Though this won't be great for printing, color-wise, it's going to be a little bit more vivid overall. Once I have the document set up, I can hit Create. And once the document is created, we're going to look to place in the image of the flamingo that you can previously download. To install it and place it onto here, I'm going to go up to File and Place. And I can choose out the flamingo's JPEG and hit Place. I'm going to look to install it in the top corner of my document. My image itself is quite large, so I'm just going to scale it down, grabbing the corner. And if I want to zoom out first, I can grab the bottom corner and shrink it down to the canvas size, to the document size. We don't want to up the size of the document just because we're working with a large overall image, but I can do my best to just place it up in the top corner and evenly distribute it over my canvas. Before I do get started, I do want to modify my layers. Over on the right side layers panel, I click on the little layers icon, and I'm going to look to lock the layer just so I don't need to go back or accidentally draw lines on this layer. So I'm going to place the lock icon on here, so now I'm unable to do any type of edits, drawing, or move the object while it's placed here. I can rename this layer Sketch, and I'm going to add a layer for outlines. With our outline layer selected, this is where most of our art is going to be going on. I'm going to go over to the left side navigation and choose out our pen tool. With the pen tool, it does show an example of how to get into modifying lines, how to create curves, or using straight lines to connect points. So you can see how you can click and drag through the example to build out curves. And you can always go back and modify it later on. But with the standard pen tool, we can use to start building out what we see with the flamingos. Before I do any of this, I'm going to look to modify out, eliminating out my fill color. My fill color currently white. I'm going to click on the red diagonal line, the none, so that we see the red diagonal appearing here. And we have black for the fill. If I want to make sure this is a true black, you may notice that the default settings for black are going to be lighter than a standard black. We want a true black, so we want to make sure our hex number is set to 00000. And I'm also going to make sure that my K is set to 100%, giving us a true black. Before I do start drawing out with the pen tool, I'm actually going to look to give us the border for our shape. So I'm going to go over to the rectangle tool over on the left side navigation. With the rectangle tool, I can click and drag from the top corner where we have the sketch drawn out. And to modify this, I want to make sure that the stroke is visible. Either at the top navigation, I can adjust the weight stroke. I'm putting up to about 5 or 6, just so, again, it's more visible. If I do want to get the stroke panel, I can go up to Window, Stroke, make sure it's visible within our screen. And again, I can adjust the thickness of the stroke based on what I'm looking to create. but I'm going to go with 5 just so it's definitely visible for us. And eventually when I do illustrate out the entire sketch, I can always change the thickness of the strokes later on. But once I have the box that is going to be our frame for the image, I'm going to go back over to the pen tool. We're going to look to draw out the curves that make up these shapes. The most important part is that we're looking to make sure that these lines are going to be intersecting. We don't want to leave gaps inside the lines, or else we're not going to be able to enclose them later on and add in color. So it's making sure that I do cross over lines and that they are going to intersect. That's going to help really make sure that this is a strong overall design. I'm going to start out with going from the border over to the end of a certain line. So I'm going to start on the outside of the border itself, click a point. I'm going to move to the curve and click and drag to create out that next curve. Once I have this line ending, I can simply hit escape. It ends the line, and then I can begin drawing out another curve. I can move up to the top, even though again I'm running past the border. This will allow me to get as accurate as possible to make sure that I get a bend that follows the overall look and feel. Again, I do want to make sure that I am getting the overlapping black lines. So you can see from the first line I originally drew, I'm making sure that the red appearing as representation of my line is intersecting and overlapping into the original first line. Again, I can hit escape to end my line. And I'm going to look to draw out this larger curve. And with this larger curve, you may have to zoom out, Command or Control minus, or I can hit Control plus to zoom in. A minus will allow me to zoom out. And again, I'm going to start over on either left side or the top edge. But again, I want to make sure that I overlap these lines. So I'm going to look to click on the outside edge of my shape. And then back towards the top where I can see the line is going to intersect with. Again, I want to make sure that it is going to overlap. It may not be exactly what the original sketch started with, but again, it's important that we make sure that the lines intersect. So once I have the line that is intersecting, I can hit escape, and we'll go back through and understand how we can tweak any lines that need be later on. So zooming back in, I can either use the zoom tool over in left side navigation or simply hit Control plus sign to zoom in on the area. Now I'm going to look to use this connecting line. I click a point, go down to where this third line was drawn out, and again draw out the curve as best possible to match it. I can hit escape and the line. And now we're going to look to start building out the flamingo shapes. So back over to the pen tool. I want to start on the outside of the shape. I can click and drag to create the curve. Once I get the curve matching to the angle that I want, I can click back on the anchor point that I just currently made. This will allow me to be able to change the direction of my curves. And we don't want to try overdoing the curves of a shape. I'm going to subtly go across to an area in which I know I can match the curve precisely to this sketch. And I want to make sure that I'm leading to the direction that I want to go to next. So you can see the handle being extended from my line, allowing me to get the angle for the next move. So even though if it doesn't match precisely, if I move up to a new area, I can look to click and drag to match that curve as best possible to get it to run corresponding to the illustration that I originally drew. So again, click and drag. And if you need to undo or if you need to redo, remember Command or Control Z. I can shorten up the line, make sure that I get the accuracy I'm looking for. We can always go back and tweak the anchor points if they're not necessarily lining up how you imagined. But I'm going to click on the anchor point and then go down to where the beak and the head meet. Click and drag. Once I get that angle, I can hit escape. it cuts off the line, or I can continue on. Just remember, if we want to build off of the shape, I'm going to look to click on the anchor point. Now I can go draw down to the edge of the beak. Click and drag to create that curve. And again, I'm taking a little bit more creative freedom. It doesn't necessarily have to match exactly to the original sketch, but we want to make sure that the lines look fluid, they look smooth, that they don't have bumps that are going to be distracting or take away from the design. Again, I'll click on the anchor point, look to build out the curve shape. If you're not able to get this proper bend or match the curve of the beak, you can always break it into smaller anchor points. But I'm going to click on the anchor point and look to get the neck. And click and drag to create the bend, and then overlapping again to match the bend on the body. So again, if I'm not satisfied with the curve, I can always hit Control Z to undo. So I'm going to zoom down a little bit. And even if I do go past the shape, I can always eliminate out these extended lines later on. So once I'm satisfied with that drawing, I can hit Escape and the line. I'm going to look to actually draw out the beak on my first flamingo. I'm going to zoom in closer to where I can see it. Up towards the beak, I'm actually going to either extend and make sure that I connect onto a new line, but I have to make sure that I intersect from one side to the next. So you don't want to see anchors actually selected, but I am able to kind of get it to snap to a anchor point so that I do have a smooth overall line. For the eyes, you may notice that they are relatively circles, so it might be easier for me just to use the ellipse tool. I click and drag, create out the curve. If I need to adjust the placement in any way, again, it's all about your preferred accuracy to the design, but I'm going to look to duplicate this eye. I can hold down Alt or Option, click and drag to create out a duplicate for your eye. And understand that we are jumping between a Mac and PC, so if you are working on a Mac, it is going to be Command, but if on a PC, you're going to be using Alt. So once I have one bird built out, I'm going to look to draw out the second one. Again, making sure that our lines start from outside the frame. I click and drag, try to match the curves. If the curves are not matching, I can always Control Z or Command Z, undo, and just shorten up, adding in an anchor point where I need or where I feel it matches the curves best. I'm going to look to click on the anchor point so I can change direction. And then again, for the neck, I'm going to go a shorter anchor point to match the curve as precise as possible. I click and drag to create the curve on the back of the neck. Go to the top of the head to get the bend. And then back to the front where the head and the beak meet, and click and drag to get that curve. I'm going to click on the anchor point, ending it short. And based off the sketch, the beak is quite large, so I'm going to probably shorten this up a little bit. Click on the anchor point, and I'm going to rotate to the opposite direction, turning it so that I can match the bend as best possible to the beak drawing. Click on the anchor point, and then matching the curve on the interior of the neck. Then I can look to create out the bend for the rest of the neck. If I want to try out the entire neck, see if it matches to the shape, you can see I'm trying to minimize the amount of anchor points, because sometimes with too many anchor points, you get jagged edges or areas that don't necessarily match well. Once I get to the edge, I can hit escape, ending my line, and I can go into building out the final line that is going to make up my beak separation from the head. So back to the pen tool. When I move my cursor over top, I can see that it is going to go to the anchor point. It's automatically snapping to. I can use that as a good placement of where I want to put my curve for my split of the beak. Click on the anchor point so I can rotate to a different angle. Again, getting a better angle overall for my design. So now if I zoom out, I can see that I've drawn out and traced over all the lines and took a little bit of creative freedom again to make sure that it works for what I'm trying to create. I can always change or adjust placements based on if I'm seeing that one eye is closer or one eye doesn't necessarily work in a certain area. I want to just create a little bit of separation, make sure that these black lines are not overlapping too much. But if I take a look at my layers, I can actually hide the sketch layer to see how my sketch came out. And again, you can see that certain lines do extend past the intersecting lines, but we'll take a look at now breaking this and separating it so it looks a lot cleaner overall. Before I do begin this, I'm actually going to look to duplicate out my artboard just so we can see the process and how it's being developed out. Over on the left side navigation, I'm going to click on the artboard tool. And for the artboard tool, I'm going to simply hold down Option or Alt and click and drag to the side. And because we're in Illustrator, it's going to actually grab all the different lines that make up the artboard. So I can replicate and create out the lines for design. So if I were to hide back the original sketch, we can see where we originally started, but now I have separate lines on their own artboard so we can see the process as we're developing it out. I'm going to click back on the Move tool or the Selection tool. I'm going to look to highlight over top of all the lines that make up our shape. The big thing here is that we're going to look to turn these into solid shapes. Right now they are just individual lines that are overlapping, but we can use the artboard tool, or the shape builder tool, to make sure that we can combine these objects into one solid shape or into bigger shapes that can be filled in with color. So clicking over on the shape builder, we can see the example that they use, connecting a bunch of little circles into one cloud shape. Before we do anything, I do want to change out my foreground color with the shape builder tool selected so that I know when I've completed a shape, because it will fill in with a color. Doesn't necessarily matter what color you choose. I'm just going to make sure that I have something visible, and we can always go back and change these colors later on. But you'll notice that if I move my cursor over top of areas, they show this graying effect over top. This allows me to know that I have enclosed all my different shapes into individual pieces, or what will be individual pieces. Just to give you an understanding, if I don't have a piece that is overlapping or a piece that does not reach, let me show you an example. If I click on this anchor point and I move it away from overlapping with this black line, and now I go to select everything with my selection tool, when I go back over with my shape builder tool, you're going to notice that certain shapes do not enclose or separate. Now I can see that these two lines are being combined into one because there is no overlap happening with this shape. We need to make sure that every little anchor point does overlap so that they can create out separations of the colors. So again, I do want to go back to my direct selection tool and click on the anchor point and click and drag it to make sure it overlaps with my original point. So if I want to make sure that all the lines again overlap and intersect, I'm going to select everything first, then click on the shape builder. And you again can see that now that I go over this area, it is overlapping with this other black line, and now they are separate pieces. So again, I can just move my cursor around, hover over certain areas to make sure that everything is overlapping. And if I wanted to make any tweaks or modifications, I can always go back in to areas, making sure that they overlap. If you do have some curves to modify, if you want to clean up some overall curves, I'm going to click back on the direct selection tool. With the direct selection tool, I can click on an anchor point, and I can adjust handles that extend from our shapes. Just simply clicking and dragging on the handle bar that extends from the anchor. Or if I hold down Alt or Option, I can look to modify one handle at a time so that I get the curve and angle that I was looking for a line. So taking a look at the top of the head, I may want to alter this handle. Again, just to smooth it out, make it look as smooth as possible so that everything flows in a nice look and feel. But again, we do have these extended lines happening on the outside frame particularly. We can see how they extend past the frame itself. With the selection tool, I select over everything, and then I'm going to go back over the shape loader. With the shape loader, I want to make sure to have a fill color. So if I have a light blue, I want to look to start separating each of these shapes into their own blocks of color. If I click on one, it automatically fills in with that fill color that I originally presented with. We're going to do this for each one to make sure that they are all unified, they're all one single piece. So I'm just simply clicking with the shape builder to make sure that each of the pieces become their own shape. For any lines extending past around the edge of the frame, I'm going to still maintain the shape builder, but this time I'm going to hold down Alt or Option. I can click and drag through these lines that extend past, eliminating them from the selections overall. So it cleans up the edges, making it look a lot more professional. But I'm also going to want to take a look at the anchor points that extend from the original lines that I presented. So if I notice that on this end anchor point, I can click on this anchor point, and I'm simply going to hit delete, and it'll take away from the original design. Same thing with the top. If I do need to make any modifications or adjustments off the shape, I can look to adjust anchor points, but I have to understand that certain anchor points are created from certain shapes. So I might have to nudge and move around anchor points till I find the one that works and eliminates from the design. So you can see if I move a piece around, because I created separate shapes for them, I may have to move certain shapes in front of others so that I eliminate out some anchor points that are covering up others. So if you notice, this little piece of black might be bothering me. So I'm going to click on it, hit Command or Control plus Shift and right bracket, and it becomes in, or it goes in front of the other layers. Same thing if I'm taking a look at this little black line extending on the corner. I can hit Command or Control Shift right bracket, again covering up that line that was overlapping or sticking out. So you may have a couple different lines that might have to be modified or cleaned up, change the arrangement of. I also may want to go into modifying this little bit of angle as we have this little black area that is represented off the beak. If I adjust this slightly, I can change out the angle so I don't have so much black extending from the edge of my beak, and this eliminates and makes sure that these will stay as one single piece and make sense with with a different color. So when we take a look at it, each of these pieces are now individual that I can click on any of them and look to fill them in with different colors. We're going to look to use gradients to help create some interest, make these more dynamic. So we're not just dealing with flat colors, but we can see how we can make them evolve, turn it into more of a stained glass effect. So before I do this, again, I'm going to just duplicate the process just so I can see the work, how it evolves. So I can hold down Alt or Option, click and drag with the artboard tool so that I have a duplicate of the shapes. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so I can focus on the shapes. If we start out with the top left side, I'm going to look to make sure that I have my gradient tool available. My gradient tool can show a balance or transition from one color to the next. Right now, the default is this white to black. And you're going to want to also have your swatches available. With my swatches, normally the gradient tool and the swatches panel are on the same bar, but we want to make sure that they are separate and sitting next to each other so we can alter and modify some of these colors. I can click and drag this swatch down. Again, as I work, I can click and drag and move the bars and tabs to where I need to make the design work. So we're starting out with currently this light blue color. I may want to change the colors entirely for my designs. I can pull colors from the swatches onto my gradient, but just understand and make sure that your fill color is showing. The black stroke or the black outline that we have for our shapes are going to stay pretty consistent throughout the design. This helps to create the sense of stained glass. So you don't want to have too thin of black lines. We want to create that solid black that's going to really stand out. So I'm going to look to first click and drag, and let's say that I want to use this red color and click and drag it onto my gradient bar, and we get this transition happening of a white to red. If I don't want to have such pure white, I'm going to actually create a sample in between the white and the red. This way it gives me a highlight of a pink color, a tint of red, and I can look to eliminate out the white that I currently have on the gradient bar. Just click and drag downward, and you'll see that now I have a transition going from light red or a pinkish tone into the red itself. I can adjust the direction of the gradient with the gradient tool on the left side navigation. Click and drag, and you'll notice that I do have black appearing. It's because I do have black over on one of my gradient stops. I can click and drag that downward, and you see that it gets eliminated. I want to create a smooth blend overall. And the reason why I'm putting the highlight or lighter color in the top left is that we're going to actually add a shine, and we want to give the sense that we have a consistent light source happening within our design. So once I have this gradient created, I'm going to go over back to my pen tool. With my pen tool, I'm going to look to draw out a highlighted section. And with the pen tool, I'm going to click points to help draw out a highlighted shape. Right now, we're currently seeing this black outline, but you'll see that I'm going to change it so that it doesn't have a outline. It's just going to be representing a white glowing effect or white shine that would be appearing over the glass area. I can connect back to where I started. And again, we're going to eliminate out the stroke for this. I'm going to change my gradient for my fill. I go back over to the white to black, but we're going to change out the white on the gradient slider, or the black on the gradient slider, to white. And for this gradient, we're actually going to adjust the opacity down to 0, giving us what it looks like a translucent gradient happening over top of the design. So if this is a white gradient into white, but the right side is going to have a 0 opacity so that it becomes a transparency. So if I click and drag down, I'm not only seeing white, but I'm getting a smooth shine effect happening over top of this corner. And as we start to add in pieces, you're going to see how adding these shines really helps to create a glass effect within our design. You can always add in additional glass effects. So if I wanted to create another shine, I click and drag based on the shine that I just created. But again, I can adjust the gradient to give more shine or less shine, or expand it out so it is very minimal overall. And I can always tweak anchor points, modify the curves, and give it a different effect to make it work for my work. So if I want to shorten this up or tighten up the areas, you can see I can just add a little glow effect or gradient effect and modify the curves to make it work. So I can move over to the next panel. Again, we want to create some very vivid, bright imagery. So for this design, we can look to change out the colors entirely. Instead of the blue, I'm actually going to sample and get a sense of the red that I currently used or previously used. And this time I'm going to change the red to a lighter orange color. And for the orange, I'm going to add additional orange and change out this pink color to a white. Clicking and dragging down from the swatches. This way I can get a lighter variation of orange. So if I want to adjust the gradient, create some highlight of orange, I click and drag from top left down to the right. And again, I'm going to look to create a shine or a gradient. I can click on the previous highlight gradient that I've made. That way it maintains the same characteristics. And again, I can look to draw out a gradient that extends over the left side of this shape. And I'm trying to match the curves just to give it a sense that it does go inward on certain areas. I can adjust the placement, but it matches pretty well to creating some highlights. And as I start to step back and see it, we start to see the development of all the different shapes and all the different colors. So clicking on a new piece, try something entirely different. Or I can go in chromatic order. If I want to go more rainbow effect, I can go yellow. Again, I'm going to sample out the orange color first. This will help maintain that sense of a light color and a darker color. I click and drag the yellow downward. Pull white onto the other swatch. If I want to get a lighter variation of yellow, click on the anchor point, eliminating out the white. And I can use the gradient tool to adjust the highlights and darker variations on the shape. Clicking again on the highlight, you can use the pen tool. And the highlights I'm creating are playing towards the top left side of each of the shapes. Doesn't mean it has to, but be consistent with your light source so that you have a direction, you give a sense of where light would be coming from. It could be the left side, it could be the right side, but just make sure that it's consistent. Again, I can change the highlight or how it travels. I want a little bit more white, appearing consistently throughout. Move down to a new area. Maybe I want to go with a green now. select on the piece, I can use the eyedropper tool to match the yellow gradient, but click and drag the green to replace out the color. Getting a lighter green variation, I can click and drag away the white, change the direction of the gradient. Again, select on the highlight so that I can use this, draw out a highlight for this section, this piece. If you ever mess up, just remember Control or Command Z. Now I can actually use this blue color, but I'm going to sample out the green. Now click and drag the blue down onto, replacing out the green. And you're just going to continue to follow the same process until you get all the way around, filling in different colors for our design. Again, for the highlights, I may want to draw out two pieces because it does have a break in between parts of the body. And because highlights and shines are near each other, I want to maintain pretty consistency between the two outlines or shines that are happening. If I don't like a color, maybe I want to take this blue and I want to apply it into a different section, like this little gap here. Maybe I want to maintain consistency on the body of the flamingos. So I may want to have a different effect. I can use the eyedropper tool, match that color in this section, but change it for the body itself. For the body, I may want to go more of a pink or purple. If I click and drag this on the blue, you can even mix different colors and shades. So maybe I want to have more blue on the design going into the purple, or with the purple or pink color. I can look to add in the whites and highlights on the object. Again, just click on the highlights, then I can look to draw out a highlight for certain pieces. Even if they're small, it can still help create the dimension and interest on the design. So again, just go piece by piece. So even though that they're close, they are different. Again, I can choose the shine. So again, I can use and repeat colors out. Maybe I want to alter them, change them around a little bit, or play with the values that I get. Maybe a little bit more whites or highlights off of colors. Or don't be afraid, again, that you can mix colors and do combinations of colors. Maybe I want to pick up some highlights of blues, picking up inside the purple. Or I can reverse that direction, switching the color around. So we get highlights and darker variations. And then we can build out the white highlights over top of shapes. So if I wanted to do multiple pieces at once, I can hold down Shift, select the pieces, and then use the eyedropper tool to match that color. Again, I may have to redraw out the direction of the gradients travel, but it can still show the same sense of how it would look on each of the pieces. So again, going back in, adding in the highlights. Again, you can change the directions of the gradients however you need or however you think it's going to help the design. If I want to create some darker variations, I can add in colors on gradients. And if you start drawing out the wrong gradient, you can always draw it out, you finish drawing it out, and just use the eyedropper tool to match it to the gradient that you are looking for. Don't be afraid to use some variations of color. Again, if I want to do darker, a lot lighter color, and then look to draw out the highlights over top again. And though this is a demo, it only uses so many breaks. You could always add in more separations to create a lot more interest, a lot more color overall. I can look to repeat a couple colors. That way I don't have to rethink the wheel or reinvent the wheel. Just go with colors that are going to stand out, make your design overall unique in their own interesting fashion. They want to go with the darker variation. Don't be afraid to change the colors into more monochromatic or different variations that are going to be your own so that they are different from everyone else's. And even the eyes can have a little bit of highlight. I can even use this one, hold down Alt or Option, click and drag it to bring it into the other one. So there are many different things that you can do. You can consider changing the outlines to a golden color. If I wanted to modify out these colors, again, I'm just going to create out another artboard just so we can see the different variation. If I highlight this all, I'm going to look to change out my stroke color. Maybe I want to try and attempt to see what happens when I do a gold. I can see what happens when I manipulate other colors as well. So you can see with the highlights, adding over top, it does pretty well of creating a good separation, making a glass effect. So you're not necessarily relying on a certain color. But for my design, I would probably prefer to make sure that I do have a gradient effect happening, just because it does look a little bit too flat with just the highlights. So all running at a 45-degree or negative 45-degree angle. You see that now travels from the top left. So you can create many different variations within your design. Just a matter of figuring out what looks best for your work. So consider what you can create, but it's all a matter of just breaking these lines into shapes, then using the gradient tool to really create your own original unique design. From here, you can look to build out your own custom original concept and make it your own. I hope you enjoyed.